Senator McAllister.
Thanks very much. I wanted to ask whether the Future Fund invested in private equity funds and the scale of that investment.
Yes, it certainly does. We have, I'll look up the exact number for you. We have a significant portfolio in private equity. So let me give you the exact number. At the end of June, we had end of September, sorry, $15.9 billion in private equity. So just under 12% of the fund.
12% of the fund. And how much of that is invested in venture capital? Is it broken down in that way?
It is. Is it broken down in the information I have in front of me? No, but I think the answer is we have, so I could stand corrected on this, but I think the answer is we have about $2 billion in venture capital.
2 billion. And of that, how much is invested in local venture capital?
It would be a few tens of millions.
Okay, so just tens of millions.
Yeah.
So presumably sort of, 1 or 2%.
Yes, a small amount. I don't know the exact number, but it is a small amount.
Yeah. So, and to be fair, the overall amount invested in venture capital is also small relative to the overall size of the fund. But why such a small amount in Australian venture capital funds?
Well, there isn't we don't tend to think of venture is one of the attractions of venture is that it's in essence it's a sort of a borderless activity. It's about finding good ideas and it's about pursuing those ideas wherever you happen to find them.
Did you say boldness? Was that your word? I'm sorry, I just didn't quite...
No, it's about pursuing good ideas.
Good ideas, okay.
Good ideas. So it's borderless, I think was the word that I used.
You'll have to tell me again.
Borderless.
Oh, borderless. Okay, thank you.
So we don't think about it in a geographic sense. We don't sort of think, Australian venture capital is better or worse than US venture capital or European venture capital. It doesn't sort of make sense to think of it that way. It's where are the good ideas? Well, let's invest in the good ideas. And so we have managers whose job it is to go and find the good venture capital managers for us, and then they go and find and support the very good investments, because as you understand, these are very small investments. The individual idea is a very, very small investment at that level with a startup company. So clearly it doesn't make sense for us to be allocating at that level
Directly.
Neither does it make sense for us to be trying to find the managers who do that, because they're still quite small investments. They're generally commitments to funds of sort of $50 million, those sorts of things. So we actually go back another step,
right,
and we find people who can find the people who find the investments. So it's a fund of funds is the expression that the industry uses. Their job is to find the good managers around the world, so it just happens that the portfolio that ends up being constructed has a very large exposure, as you might expect, to the Silicon Valley, and relatively smaller exposures to other markets around the world. It has a growing exposure to China, because that's a marketplace that has been growing quite rapidly in the venture space. Hopefully that answers the question. It's not that we target a small or a large exposure, it's just about where the good ideas are found by our managers.
Right, so your evidence is that there aren't many good ideas in Australia, or that there aren't many good ideas in Australia that are being recognised by the finders.
Yes, I don't think it's certainly not the good ideas. I think it's one of the things that's held the Australian venture cap industry back is that, frankly, performance hasn't been very good from it historically. For whatever reason, the local venture capital industry hasn't actually generated particularly good returns, certainly not on a global scale. The one thing I would say, very quickly is that that I think that we think that may be changing, and there are some signs of some really interesting funds that are starting to set up in this country, and that is obviously something that we would welcome. We would like to have Australian exposure, more Australian exposure, if we could. We do actually take part in attempting to foster the local industry, and one of these managers, these fund of funds that I talked about, people who that we think have. The reason we invest with them is we think they're the best in the world at doing this. We brought them to Australia. We ran a seminar with the local venture capital industry, invited to our offices representatives of all of the sort of significant venture capital funds for a full day with this organisation, so that they could talk about what, in their view, it takes to be a successful venture firm, what it takes to get global institutional capital, and the feedback we get was that session was well received and was something that was of benefit to them. And as I said, I think that there are improvements. We see improvements in the local industry that we would be hopeful that those numbers, those low numbers, can change, and that we would see our portfolio having a higher exposure to the local venture capital industry.
Thanks, Mr. Neal.